Amazon is the biggest 3PL in the world because they can manage any SKUs that are coming in. I was like, that's a fair comparison. So the conversation we both were having is like, hey, why can't a 3PL adopt robotics? Because Amazon is the world's biggest 3PL, and they have robotics. So at that point, my conversation with that individual was like, yeah, I agree. I think Amazon is the biggest 3PL in the world, but they get to call shots, right? They get to tell that my warehouse, this warehouse is my non-sortable, this warehouse is my sortable, this is my 12 by 24 by 12, 16, something like that. This is a
Yep.
sortable item.
Yep.
Like they get to get the shots, and that's why they can manage it. As a 3PL who is trying to get more revenue, I'll take on anything right now because I do
Yeah.
not get to dictate those things.
Yeah.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Parth Pithani, and today I'm your host for Robot for Warehousing podcast. I'm so excited to talk to Michael anyway, so I'm already jumping into that. We are going to Michael Myers. He is one of the individual that I wait for his comments on LinkedIn because he has those thoughtful comments coming from an engineering background. So it was pleasure to reach out to him, and I was like, can we have a conversation on the podcast? And he gladly accepted it. So today we are talking to Michael Myers. He's a director of solutions at Third Wave. He's also a solutions leader coming from his past experience, an engineering leader who grew into a solution side of it. He has a very unique background, and I think transitioning from industrial engineering to a solutions leadership, um, I have so many questions for him, so I'll let him give a quick intro, and then we'll quickly jump into it. Michael, why don't you go take it away?
Yeah. Hello, everyone. My name is Mike Myers, Director of Product Solutions with Third Wave Automation. I've been with Third Wave for a little over 3 years now. Previously, as Parth mentioned, was primarily in engineering roles in some capacity, either in vertically integrated organizations or in 3PL applications. So perhaps a unique perspective or a unique vantage point, if you will. But yeah, excited to talk with Parth and see what we get into here.
Awesome. So, Mike, I have very first question, right? Let's jump into it, right? So you started as an engineer and then grew into this solutions leadership role. And I always like to ask this question because everyone has a unique journey to this. And I think engineering is a place in warehousing where you get to interact with a lot of pain points and problems in a very unique way. You get to bring so much data to that problem solution, if you will. So how has your engineering career or background actually shaped your approach to warehouse robotics?
Yeah, yeah. So I started out, we'll say, as a pretty scrappy engineer in the sense that, like any engineer, I enjoy getting deep into the data and the desk work, if you will, right? I think that's kind of natural. It's what you're trained for almost to a degree, right? But I really found myself gravitating towards working on the floor, working with people, and trying to just improve things. And it really didn't matter what it was. I enjoyed the process of making things better. Um, that making things better, though, was different inside, vertically integrated or the 3PL space, because you are attacking all of these different surface areas of problems. Getting after all these very painful problems, but you're getting after areas that are unique all the time, which is a lot of fun. But it tends to mean that you're not mastering any one technology or skill set or what have you. And I had an opportunity to start engaging with Third Wave, ironically, through evaluating them from a technology standpoint in my role in a previous organization. And after some time, it made sense to consider what it would look like for myself to work in a robotics or automation company on the technology side doing solutions, as I thought, hey, I have a a different perspective here. I ask a little bit different questions. I care about slightly different things. I think this would be a good fit for myself. And I think that the automation company could benefit from that perspective as well. So after some chats, ended up at Third Wave Automation. Um, and yeah, it's been a lot of fun. It's been a
No,
lot of
that's
fun.
nice. That's awesome. And I think it's very unique because I did a little bit last 2 years before where I am right now. I think a lot of 3PL engineering work, so which was really interesting because you gotta work fast, you gotta work a little scrappy, and still make sure that the orders are being pushed out of it. So it's a very unique balance of walking on a tightrope to a level. Um,
Mhm.
so that brings me to the question that, like, as you move from the engineering role to a more solution focused leadership role, right? What were the shifts that you had to do? Were there mind shift shifts, or did you turn into any r- went into any major problems around it, or not? Let me rephrase it: major challenges around it, or differences that you had to adjust to?
Yeah, you know, personally, being on the 3PL side or being on the consumer side, we'll say, of technology, when you run into challenge, a problem, whatever it may be, the world is available as a solution, right? So you can go anywhere, talk to anyone, you can peel the onion back and find an answer, right? When you're working within the automation provider, that's not the same. You're going to need to,
Mm.
you're working through a limited team, you're working through, uh, specific vendors potentially. It's just a different world to solve the internal problems. But when you talk about interacting with customers or applying the technology into the space, I actually think a lot of the skills transfer directly because I had always been a very operations oriented individual in the sense that wanted to advocate for the operations team, wanted to make sure that they were going to end up with a system, whatever that meant in context, that was manageable. It met their needs from capacity or ease of work or whatever the challenge was. And I think that frame of mind of just being very, operations oriented in that way translated really nicely to providing technology to the operations in a different capacity.
That's that's actually a very, I think very few leaders understand that operations focused or operations oriented is such an important thing. I remember my days when, like, as an operator, as a director of a building or a GM of a building, they do a ton of those things, right? The balancing human resources versus pushing out orders while making sure that their employees are being okay, they have a right technology and labor management around it. So much things that they have to do within those 8 to 10 hours,
Mhm.
and employee issues, something around it. So I always felt like being best buddies with all operations is always good, right? Because
Yeah.
and again, there is no they are the individuals who face pain points every day, problems every day. So
Mhm.
just being in front of them, talking to them just helps you understand the pain points they go through, and probably you hit a eureka moment and like, oh, this is, I think this is what I can solve. Let me help you out here.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I think you're exactly right. Right. The operations leaders are inundated with information and uh, organizational pursuits, whether that be new business or new technology or way of working, whatever it is. They have all the day to day challenges of managing the labor, of making sure that things happen on time when they're supposed to, keeping internal stakeholders happy or customers
Hmm.
happy, whatever it is. And if you're able to position yourself as an advocate for them and somebody who's not adding things to their plate but taking it away, whether that's in an internal role or you're an automation provider, either way, right? You're well set up to actually be effective and help them achieve whatever that next step is.
Correct. Yeah. I remember my days when usually the client escalation calls, right? If it's a 3PL world, client escalation calls while making sure you're working with your staffing agency to make sure that they bring the right individuals on the job. It's so much things that they need to balance, and they do it really well. I think it's just as you said, like taking problems that we can solve from taking from away from their plate is, I think, it's a good thing that I think everyone should do if you're an engineering focused role right now. I think whoever is listening, I think make best buddies with your operators and help them out.
Hmm. Absolutely. Yep.
Awesome.
And as an engineer, they're going to do things that drive you crazy, but there's probably a reason why, right? There's probably a reason why. Go understand it.
That is true. That is true. So now let's shifting like a little bit gears and like now actually going into around like if you think about warehouse solutions for robotic solutions for warehouses, if you will. So when you are thinking of designing robotic solutions for warehouses, like when you put in your head for designing it, what are some key factors that you look or focus on that you to ensure that it works really well on your warehouse floor, the robotic solution?
Yeah. So depending on the type of technology, um, it's always going to be about capacity required, throughput required. Um, but the area that I spend a lot of time in is all of the exceptions when things go wrong, right? So you can think about it from third wave's perspective for just a moment. There are lots of pallet types or payloads that we handle, right? There are some that we don't, or some that are more problematic. And it's really important for our solution to understand uh, how frequently we're going to encounter those types of challenges or problems in the operation. And then how do we tie that all together from a workflow standpoint, right? Like
Mm,
if if the percentage is really low, it's 1% of the time. We have a remote operator. We can allow them to manage that situation, right?
mm,
And it flows just like everything else. No big deal. But there's other scenarios where we may be going into a building and only taking on 1% of the volume of the total movement in the facility. So now we're getting into, well, how does the integration actually need to function? What are the things that we need the WM to do to make both systems successful? The two systems being the humans who are still doing what they've always been doing, but also the third wave system that's going to be operating alongside of them. That integration, the decision making that we need to occur on the WMS side starts to change to enable both of them.
makes sense. I think when you mention exception, it just came back to my I would say 2019, 2018 days when I was working on a project implementing AMRs with an automated packaging machine with a WMS. I was like that. I remember like we did all our vanilla like the green path testing. And I'm like, let's now go into the exception handling. Like, what if the bot shows up and the box is not ready? And what if the message goes to the packaging machine, but bot is never there? So those things can really, like, how do we solve for it? Because sometimes you cannot just tell bot to that, hey, specific bot number 123, go to the packing station or go to the packaging machine. You can't really say that. So that I remember those days where like, how do we solve for that? Because in reality, there is no easy way to solve for it. Maybe try starting again or just do something around it. I'm trying to
Yeah,
remember how did we solve for it, but I don't remember right now. But that was an interesting use case or
yeah,
exception case.
it's really funny. The default line of thinking is almost always to solve it through a technology lens. Like how do we do this from technology standpoint? But there's also oftentimes a human element or a human approach to it that is maybe the right answer or
Mm.
at least the easiest answer, but oftentimes the right answer. And it's funny how a lot of times you circle right back to that as actually we're going to need the human to make a decision here and provide some guidance and yeah.
That is true. That is true. Yeah, and that actually also now, if now as I think about it, I think, and you as you mentioned about it, I think a lot of piece picking arms also has that challenge, right? Because if they're not able to pick that item, they keep going again and again. At
Hmm.
that point, someone has to decide, make a decision. three attempts, let's figure out someone to go and fix it. And actually that also brings me to like that scalability conversation, because now like I tried to remember, like there was an analysis done somewhere where it was like one robotic arm with like a 99% or 99.9% accuracy or something like that, that you need still one individual that can basically man five robotic cells, because every few seconds, every not few seconds, few minutes, there might be an issue. So I think that what I'm trying to get into is the scalability, right? So when it comes to scalability, especially for companies like a startups in the warehouse to robotic space, and I know capital has been limited since 2021, I would say.
Mm-hmm.
So how do you approach it? How do you think startups should approach it when it comes to sustainable growth and versus the capital limitation that we have right now?
You know, that's not exactly where I thought you were going with that question. So I'm gonna answer what I thought you're gonna ask, and then I'll come back to it. Um, the the interesting thing I think is, in any application or any use of robotics, whatever automation, um, there's always going to be a human element that's required. And if you're on the purchasing side, let's say, a lot of those human components come down to exceptions, right? It comes down to the odd use case or the unplanned work, whatever it may be. And if you're this is, there's going to be a couple of robotics people who don't like this, but if you can't ask the vendor, hey, how are you going to manage this? How are we going to think about this in the real world? And you can't get a very viable answer that feels like something that's, workable, achievable. Perhaps continue evaluating options in the market. That the exceptions are the death of automation, right? Like they are the things that kill ROI, the things that extend project timelines,
Yeah.
and it's really about the unplanned exceptions, the unknowns, and making sure that whatever the system is that's going in has the ability to make that easy for operators to live in. Um, it's great to put together the 3-month plan of, hey, here's how we're going to eliminate this systemically from the system. We're going to train the robot in a new way, or we're going to turn the knob on the integration to drive a new outcome. That's great. But in the meanwhile, you still have 3 months that you need to be able to operate the system and deliver the orders or deliver the replenishment or whatever it is, right? And I think in those early conversations with a vendor, evaluating how they think about that from a deployment standpoint is just massive.
I think when you said that exceptions are the death, I think I used to say when I was on the warehouse robotics side, I was like, as a seller, I was like, automation likes constant, right?
Yep.
If there is a constant, then I can easily put in let me rephrase. I can find a use case where some kind of automation solution can help, but I need to find a constant. And I think
Mm-hmm.
the constant is always the hardest point to find within the warehousing world. And I think that's where we always see the challenges. I think the the way I have noticed is like there are some constants, but the constants are usually with the big companies. Like for the and again, I might be going on a tangent right now, but I think one of the individual once someone told me that there is no the individual told me that Amazon is the biggest 3PL in the world because they can manage any SKUs that are coming in. I was like, that's a fair comparison. So the conversation we both were having is like, hey, why can't a 3PL adopt robotics? Because Amazon is the world's biggest 3PL and they have robotics. So at that point, my conversation with that individual was like, yeah, I agree. I think Amazon is the biggest 3PL in the world, but they get to call shots, right? They get to tell that this warehouse is my non-sortable, this warehouse is my sortable, this is my 12 by 24 by 12, 16, something like that. That's the
Yep.
sortable item.
Yep.
Like they get to get the shots, and that's why they can manage it. As a 3PL who is trying to get more revenue, I'll take on anything right now because I do
Yeah.
not get dictate those things.
Yeah. Yeah. It's consistency looks really different depending on the facility.
Yeah.
right? Just to put some numbers to it, you could be doing 1,000 of something a day, and maybe 800 looks like consistency, right?
Yeah.
That's a lot. 80%. That's pretty good.
Yeah.
We do
Yeah.
this thing 80% of the time. That doesn't mean that you're going to find an ROI or good value at the 1,000 when you're comparing to your point, Amazon down the street doing it 20,000 times
Yeah.
within a day, within a shift, whatever it may be. Yeah, the scalability of their network and the design of their network sets them up well for
Yeah.
automation, adoption, consumption.
Correct. Yeah. And I think they that's what they are doing, right? They are dictating those terms around constant, right? When you think about that, the reason they have those shelf to go people to basically Kiva bots, I would say. And when they have the reason they have Kiva bots is because they do not need to worry about the put away logics. They can store anywhere, anything. Like they don't have to worry about those things. So that's why they can do that. If they went to some other automation provider or automation like a QBSRS or ASRS solution, they would have to start thinking about different kind of SKU profiles and different kind of things around that.
Yep, absolutely, absolutely. Yeah, and the vastness of their SKU base buys them some flexibility that's hard to get otherwise. So,
Yeah.
we talked about like retail apparel industry being tough, right? The SKU base is massive.
Yeah.
Um, Getting any type of commonality or order affinity is really tough.
Mm-hmm.
And because you're always trying to find those matches, right? Hey, this is going to be shipped with this. I'm going to get them together. It's really hard in that space just because of the number of SKUs. But if you keep going out that curve, the problem kind of self corrects because the randomness itself, with enough randomness, you get to the ability to drive affinity just because you're going to be moving past this other random item that happens to be on an order at the same time,
Yeah.
right?
That is
Whereas
true.
at a smaller height, smaller SKU base, it doesn't happen to be true in the same way.
Yeah, that is true. And again, I just might be throwing out one comment again, which is very total, completely tangential. It's like I remember I was reading an article on in some financial newspaper. It's like predicting one individual's spend is hard,
Mm-hmm.
but predicting his spends of an economy or a group of individuals or a group or a nation, it's very easy. It never made sense to me, but now I can see like as you make it more random, it becomes more trend driven.
Yep. Yep. Absolutely.
Yeah, it's just so funny. Like it's everything is coming around. So now, I want to shift gears and help out. Let's say as a decision maker, whereas robotics for right. Um, as you are exploring, let's be honest. Like if you walk the floor of Modex this year, like so many different solutions, so many of those things in the market. As we are thinking about those things, and if I'm an end user, what are the some important question I should be asking when I'm talking to the providers?
Yeah, I think the first question, again, it's going to be maybe a hard answer to stomach. The first question you need to ask is internally and not externally. It's, do I actually have the right people in the organization to do this thing, right? Whatever it is. Um, I think with the prevalence, to your point, of the technologies, the solutions that you can see at any trade show now, uh, there's almost this fear of missing out, and you have to do it right. And on the robotic side, we love that. That's great, but you still need to have the resources that internally understand what it is you're actually trying to achieve, or driving it from a project standpoint, or doing the technology evaluations. So first, making sure that you have that capability, and if you don't, that's okay. There are resources out there, both as organizations, but also individuals that can fill that gap for you, right?
Hmm.
Um, then once you have that skill set, you've determined, hey, we can take this on, and you're starting to evaluate, and you've narrowed down the field, let's say, of potential technologies and how they're applicable to you. I think it's really about how can you go see it and feel it and validate that it's real, right? The show floor at Modex doesn't give you a great sense of what it's like in the real world. So how can you go validate? How can you go talk to a customer that's actually using the technology, getting their real world experience? And man, if you can, doing so on a new project, I think is more important than doing so on a installation that's been live for 3 years,
Mhm.
right? So the installation that's been out there for 3 years, that's a happy customer. The things have been worked through, the challenges have been observed and addressed, and you may have a whole new team in that building now that didn't go through the initial deployment, didn't go through the pain of actually bringing things up and making it real in the real world. And if you can get in and experience something that's still fresh and interact with those teams, I think you'll get a much better sense of what it's going to be like to work with that partner in terms of how the technology is going to function on day one, how they're going to respond to challenges, how they're going to help you overcome whatever it is. Um, I've yet to see a technology deployment go perfectly as it's written on paper, right? It just doesn't go that way. There's going to be something. So making sure that whoever that vendor is has the capability to sit in the trenches with you and work through it, I think is really important.
Yeah, I don't think so that exists, right? A flawless implementation for any sort of thing, right? I,
No.
I I remember building the website for the WHSCrobotics.com, and I remember I was like, everything is going well. We were hitting the targets and like the milestones and everything, and suddenly we hit a pause when we are supposed to do the go live. We hit a big pause that delayed the whole project by like 2 weeks, and I was like, we could never imagine that. I was like, I mean, it's a nature of the game. Like, right? Any implementation, be it small or
Yeah.
big, you gotta prepare for those unexpected things. Unfortunately, I was trying to update the website right before Modex, so I was working with a company. I was like, yeah, let's figure out for like February end is their go live date. We'll figure out so we'll figure out if something happens, and if not, you gotta pivot and figure out another way. So I completely hear you on that. I think while we're having this conversation, you point out a very interesting and a very insightful point, which was like, as an operator, are you ready? Right? It's not just looking out and going for the next magic bullet that you're expecting to solve all your problems. Are you internally prepared for it? And I think
Mhm.
it's just such an important point that folks to a level don't understand, to be in my opinion, because it's just not just education, right? It's education, building teams around it, making sure you are doing the typical change management process around it.
Mhm.
Because I have seen projects where people get engaged on thinking that, yeah, it's a simple project, we can do it, we know what we are doing it, but then they implement it, but there is no team to maintain it afterwards, right?
Mhm.
And like an ASRS solution, if you have a solid ASRS solution, implementation had a hiccup but went well, you are shipping orders using ASRS, but then 3 months into it, 4 months into it, the team, as you said, implementation goes away, the support team comes in, and if you do not have right teams at that point, documentation around it, making sure they know the handover process, it's just a failure after that. Like, it's just a
Yep.
failure to be happening. Like, I would say next 6 months, if there is no solid handover, no documentation, in next 6 months the operator is going to call the chief supply chain officer or the regional VP or a VP
Yeah.
of that building. I'm like, guys, we are having problem with the SRS.
Yeah. No, absolutely. It's, you know, not only do you need to understand how to maintain it, right? Just the physical maintenance that has to occur, if that's part of your solution, but also you need to understand how to operate it. What do the different levers do, right?
Mm-hmm.
Very few systems, even automated systems, are truly static. Different inputs drive different outcomes, right?
Yeah.
And understanding what those input levers are, how you pull on them, how you don't pull on them,
Yeah.
whatever it may be to get to the outcome, that's not a trivial exercise. And it shouldn't be entirely learning on the fly. There's always going to be that component of learning on the fly, right? Because everything is going to be slightly different. Every facility or operation is going to be slightly different. But you should have a bit of a playbook there that whoever is deploying it, either external vendor, the internal team, whatever it may be, that they're handing off a playbook that says, this is how it actually operates. This was the thought process on why XYZ decision was made. Here's how you drive at this problem or this outcome under, some conditions, and making that accessible for everyone so that it doesn't become tribal knowledge, but it remains documented knowledge that's
Yeah.
referenceable and it's being maintained. I mean, that's a big one, right? Perhaps that's a good litmus test is if you don't have documentation in your operation today, expect automation to be challenging.
Yeah, that is true. That is such a solid point because I remember my days when I spent I spent the whole peak season in a warehouse because the ASRS was working. It was shipping orders, but it was not working to what we expect, or we expected it to work, and we were just working sure like we were working on developing a maintenance program around it. We were working with our provider to solve for like IT issue integration issues, and it was a mermaid of issues. And I think the challenge was, I think one of the things that also happened was, I think the documentation was not there. Like team was fast to learn, get on it, but I think you can only go to so much level if you don't have a documentation. That after that you gotta work with your partners to solve for it.
Mm-hmm.
So that brings me to a very important question, and I think this is something as a learning lessons for everyone. So, with your with your experience and with your interactions, what is one mistake, or what are those few mistakes that folks do as an operator when they're exploring warehouse robotics or implementing warehouse robotics?
Yeah. So perhaps stepping out of third wave as an example, I see a lot of people talking about averages when looking at their needs or throughput demands, what have you. And averages are a really poor way to build a business case. One, because it's unlikely to hold true, but two, it sets you up for pain when you're actually operating that system. We can use cobots as a good example here. And pick your favorite vendor. It doesn't really matter, right? Those technologies are all designed or sold at some throughput. And there's a bunch of assumptions that go into what that throughput's going to be. And they're trying to find some, uh, line that covers a nice percent of your annual days volumes. And your peak days are known to a degree to not be covered. And okay, great. How are you going to cover it? You got an ROI for the 7 months, right? That's great.
Yeah.
Hopefully. But on the backside, you have a couple months thereafter. How are you going to cover it? Is your plan to shift up with more bots and you're going to ramp your headcount? Or are you going to pivot and bring in manual labor to cover that delta? And think through, that has implications not just in the material handling equipment, but also on your WMS. You now have different allocation requirements. Am I going to separate this work content? Am I going to keep it together? I now have potentially challenges in needing different square footage for the vehicles depending on that peak to trough delta, right? If I have a 5x delta, well, I may need twice the square footage during peak season for these bots in space to be able to handle that increased throughput. So, don't build your business case on averages. Think through not just peak, but your low days too, right? Like you need to get value out of the system on the random Tuesday where the order pool just isn't what you thought it was going to be. How are you going to do that? And then explore flexibility of the system in a meaningful way. And to give you a bit of an example,
Mm-hmm.
I'm sitting on the sidelines watching a automation implementation occur right now where doesn't involve third wave in any way, but it's a newer technology, and there are some limitations there that you wouldn't think from the outside looking in. It wasn't until you actually got into it that it started to make a lot of sense. But limitations like, hey, the operators can't be signed into mobile units to be able to interact with this system. They need to be signed into a PC terminal, which really means that they're locked into some coverage area that they're operating. They don't have flexibility to just move really
Yeah.
quickly and easily, which then turns into a challenge in terms of the low volume days, where you actually need the people to be adjusting about throughout the shift. It's way more painful than they had imagined. High volume days, totally different. All the stations are occupied, people aren't moving, they're just pumping through the volume. But bigger point being, make sure that the flexibility and the real inner workings of the system are there to enable you to be successful in the way that you're going to have to operate throughout that kind of continuum of different operating modes, the high volume, the low volume, the different order profiles, etc.
Oh, makes sense. Makes sense. I think definitely a lot to chew there. I think it's a very interesting point of view. I feel like I think I've not heard this before, to be honest. And again, I think it's the right way to think about it as well, because as you said, like maybe everyone is defaulting to like the easy way out, like, hey, let's just design for average and we'll figure it out everything afterwards, right? I think that's what we folks are defaulting to it. But I think, yeah, as you challenge that thinking, I think it's a very good perspective, because in a good way you're challenging that perspective, saying, guys, yeah, that's great, you start with average, but you got to prepare for those variabilities that come around, that you're not thinking about it, that can add up the cost, that you're not just even thinking about it right now.
Yeah, yeah. Well, and making sure that, you know, to use a painful example, if you design for averages, and let's say your average day is 50,000 units, uh, and you know that historically your true peak days are 200,000 units. Well, you hope that that system has the ability to flex up to some degree, right? But what the question you need to ask is, can it flex up to 200,000? And if it can't, what does that mean? And is that outcome okay? If it can flex up to 100K, well, I got 100K left over now. Um, is me shipping those a day later okay?
Mm.
Maybe, perhaps, right? There's a cost associated with it.
Yeah.
It's a broader question than just the internal operations team at this point, but
Cool.
understanding the outcomes and what's the cost or the penalties or the perception problems that come with it, I think are important to understand.
Makes sense. Makes sense. Thank you, Mike, for all the insights. I think we were supposed to chat for 30 minutes, and I that always happens with me. I keep chatting, 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 but I think this was a great conversation, Mike. I think she provided so unique perspective as an engineering leader, and now in a solutions leadership role. I think it's very good to learn. Like, and honestly, I now I'm gonna think about my business cases when I'm making about the averages. I think so. So no, I appreciate all the insight and I appreciate all the conversations, and I think folks will find this very useful as well as they think about their automation or robotics journey. Any departing thoughts, Mike?
No, no, I really appreciate you having me on. I had fun chatting. Uh, as you mentioned, I love just generally talking about warehousing and technology. Uh, it's not a joke. I do it day and night. So if anyone wants to have those conversations, I'm happy to do so, regardless of what the technology is. If I can be helpful to you, I'm happy to do so.
Yeah, and Mike is very active on LinkedIn. I request all of you all to follow, connect with him. I think he's a great individual to follow, because I think he has insights. And I find it very insightful when we chat on like LinkedIn banters, if you will. No, thank you, Mike, again, and appreciate you all joining today for the conversation. And we'll see you next time. You have been listening to Robot Forward Warehousing Podcast with Parth Pithani. Stay connected with us by subscribing to the show on your favorite podcast player. If you like what you heard, please rate us and help us reach more warehouse robotics practitioners. Thank you for listening. Until next time.